I'm going to argue against the burning of waste in cement kilns as being bad, not only for the local community, but also the planet. I've been involved in waste management since 1985. I'm trying to advance and it's not advancing. Can you help me? It's just switch the clock off at the moment, if you wouldn't mind, because I can't advance the slides. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm opposed to burning waste in purpose-built facilities, either trash incinerators or hazardous waste incinerators. I'm even more opposed to burning waste in cement kilns, because what you're doing is when you burn waste in cement kilns, you're taking it out of the hands of professionals and giving it to amateurs. The cement industry is professional at making cement, but they're not professional at handling waste. Cement kiln operators think in terms of tons of product, tons of constituent materials. Toxicologists think in terms of milligrams, nanograms, picograms, or even femtograms. So we're operating in two different worlds here. Cement kiln operators think in terms of lumps of clinker, whereas toxicologists think in terms of nanoparticles. Burning waste is good business for the cement company. Obviously, they get paid for the waste rather than paying for fuel, but it's not good for the health of the community. I would invite you all to go to Pasco, I think it is. They have about 5 cement kilns down there. It's an environmental disaster there. In terms of emissions, you've heard about toxic metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and so on. The concern here is that many toxic metals, lead, mercury, interfere with the fetal and infant brain development at very small levels. And you heard from the last speaker that some of these toxic metals are not captured by their crude environmental protection devices. In addition, you have these new compounds, very, very toxic compounds, actually formed during the burning and cooling processes. I'm talking about the dioxins. And the main concern here is that dioxins accumulate in animal fat, in grazing animals, sheep, goats, cows, and so on. In our work, a paper that I published in 1987 showed that 1 liter of cow's milk would give you as much dioxin as you would get if you breathe the air next to the cow for 8 months. 8 months of breathing in just a liter of cow's milk. Once these dioxins get into the human body, they accumulate in our fat. And the man has no way of getting rid of these dioxins, but the woman has. The woman could get rid of dioxins by having a baby. So when she's pregnant for 9 months, the dioxins move from her body fat to the fetus. And then after the fetus is born, the infant is then breastfed. So the highest doses of dioxin are going to the fetus and the infant, and they are potent endocrine disruptors interfering with the development of the brain and the sexual system and many other systems in the body. The difference between theory and practice, there's a world of difference between the public relations promotion of cement kilns and the actual day-to-day reality. And that day-to-day reality is ruining people's lives. Now, you need 3 things to protect yourself from any incineration. 1 is strong regulations. 2 is adequate scientific monitoring. And the 3rd is aggressive government enforcement of the regulations. If any one of those is weak, then the public is not protected. And in the case of cement kilns burning waste, none of these things are protective. First of all, the regulations. There are 7 times weaker regulations for the air emissions from cement kilns than for trash incinerators. And the reason for that is quite simple. The amount of gas that you produce when you burn a ton of waste in a cement kiln is 7 times higher than the gas that you produce when you burn a ton of waste in a regular incinerator. So it's not fair to measure the pollutants in terms of milligrams per cubic meter. It should be based on milligrams per ton of waste burned. The monitoring of emissions from cement kilns is grossly inadequate. They are monitored both for dioxins and toxic metals. They use spot test, We heard about continuous sampling from a previous speaker. They're talking about carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and so on. Yes, you can get continuous monitoring for them, but you can't get continuous monitoring for dioxins or toxic metals. For those, they use spot tests, 6-hour tests under ideal circumstances. And this is typically what you see in reports about dioxin emissions from cement kilns. These are all based upon spot tests. Now, what we have today in Europe for many countries is 4-week sampling systems, not collecting in a probe for 4 hours, but 6 hours, but collecting in that probe the emissions for 4 weeks. And the difference is huge. The 6-hour test measures dioxin under ideal conditions. The 4-week sampling deals with real conditions. It includes startup, shutdown, and upset conditions. And you have many upset conditions making cement. Not a problem when you're making cement, but a huge problem when you're burning waste. And here's a real case example of one of the state-of-the-art incinerators, one of the best in Europe, built in the Netherlands, far more air pollution control equipment that you have on a cement kiln, far more sophisticated. But even so, what they did in the Netherlands for the first time was to side by side compare 6-hour measurements with 4-week sampling. And here's the table. You see, the first line was for a 6-hour test, and the dioxin concentrations are very low. But for the next line is a 4-week test, and you'll notice that the emissions now, and this we're talking concentrations, not total concentrations, so they are strictly comparable, 1,000 times higher, 1,200 times higher, 1,200 times higher for the 4-week sampling, and they did it again, and nearly 500 times higher. What they also did is they measured the dioxin in chickens' eggs near the incinerator and further away from the incinerator. The standard is green there, 1.7 picograms of dioxin equivalents per liter, I think, or kilogram, whatever. The red ones are way above the standard for the chicken's eggs. The yellow ones, orange ones are lower, and the green ones are at the standard. And you notice that clustered around the incinerator, they are above the allowed levels in chicken's eggs. So the chicken's eggs are a wonderful monitor of dioxins, much, much better than the very crude 6-hour test. Another issue has emerged since the beginning of this century is the fact that all high temperature incineration produces nanoparticles. We've had nanoparticles for a long time, but the problem of nanoparticles when you're burning waste is the enormous surface area of these particles, less than 1 micron in diameter. Not much in terms of total mass, but in terms of total surface area, huge. And these toxic metals and dioxins deposit on these particles as a function of surface area. So the particles, these nanoparticles, are enriched in dioxin and toxic metals. So a significant fraction of the toxics then come out as nanoparticles. Now, the horrible thing is that these are not regulated. They are not regulated or monitored either in incinerators or cement kilns. So here, typically in incineration, they regulate at 10 microns. And in some European countries, they're going to be regulating at 2.5. But nanoparticles, a diameter of less than 1 micron, there's no regulation for this. There's no accountability for this. So not only do you have poor monitoring, you have no monitoring, and you have no regulations, and you have no government enforcement. The public is not being protected from these pollutants. Now, the issue, once they get into the environment, they can then, well, first of all, they're not captured efficiently in the air pollution control used in cement kilns, which is very crude, and they can travel long distances. They remain suspended for long periods of time, and they can go deep down in the lungs. But the worst part of this story is that these particles are so tiny, they squeeze between the lipids and proteins, which make up the membrane. There is no defense. There is no defense in the lung to prevent these particles going into our bloodstream. And once they're in our bloodstream, they are circulated to every tissue in the body. And here's an electron micrograph of a particle in brain tissue, and this particle contains lead and barium and chromium and iron and silicon, and that's in the brain tissue. Now, this year, there was a very important paper published by researchers at the University of Montreal. For the first time, they linked nanoparticles in air pollution with increased risk for brain cancer. And specifically, the measurement they came up with, a 1-year increase in pollution exposure of 10,000 nanoparticles. That would be less than a billionth of a gram, very small amount, per cubic centimeter in the air raised the risk of brain cancer by more than 10%. So this is the study. Those who want my presentation, I'm sure we can send it to you, but there's the full information for that very, very important paper. There have also been very, very important papers on the similar issue with health effects of particles from Mexico City. So this is what we're talking about, the difference in theory and practice ruining people's lives, and the government is not even monitoring this situation. Now, another argument with cement kilns is the fly ash, which is the sink for toxic metals, which in an incinerator is usually sent to a hazardous waste facility for safe storage. In the case of cement, is recycled back into the cement kiln. So now the sink for these toxic materials is first in the clinker and then in your final product. So you've got to be making toxic cement. In the cement kilns, the clinker is ground into a fine dust to make the cement, and that means that workers and local residents are exposed to this fine dust, which is bad enough, but when the cement kiln is using hazardous waste, it's even more disastrous for the workers and for the residents who breathe in that dust. Now, the whole issue of sustainability, this is a joke. This is a joke. The promoters of co-processing are to use the word several times a day of sustainability. This is not a sustainable practice to burn finite materials, and to compare cement kilns with incinerators is to miss the point. You should be comparing both cement kilns and incinerators to a zero waste approach. That then would allow you to get into this discussion of genuine sustainable development. This is second-rate sustainable development. Burning waste in a cement kiln or an incinerator is a waste of energy. Notice all the talk about energy, energy, energy. It's a waste of energy at the global level. And the reason that is the case is that you waste the opportunity to recover the embedded energy in the products and materials that you're burning, the embedded energy used in extraction, transport, and manufacture of the products and packaging that you're burning. So if you look at the linear economy here, extraction, production, consumption, waste, you use an enormous amount of energy to extract materials from raw materials, and more energy transporting them around the world, more energy in manufacture, more energy again in transport. None of that energy is saved, comes back to you when you burn these materials. On the other hand, a combination of reuse and recycling and composting drastically reduces the need for this embedded energy in the next and future production cycles. That's where sustainability is. That's where the linear economy is converted into a circular economy. The incineration and cement kilns are perpetuating the linear economy by ignoring the whole system of the linear economy. The modern incinerator. Thank you. The modern incinerator is trying to perfect a bad idea. Our task in the 21st century is not to perfect the art of destroying discarded materials, but to stop making packaging and products that have to be destroyed. So the problem of waste is not a technological problem. We need better organization, better education, better industrial design. There is a better alternative to burning waste, and that is the zero waste solution. There is a Spanish issue of this book, which I wrote in 2013. So in this book, I talk about the 10 steps to zero waste. Obviously, I don't have time to go into that today, but the central issue is that zero waste is a combination of community responsibility and industrial responsibility. And the community has to say to industry, if we can't reuse it, if we can't recycle it, if we can't compost it, you shouldn't be making it. And the cement kilns and the incinerators are ducking that central question, which should dog the 21st century. My recommendations: the Mexican government should be promoting a zero waste program, not burning waste. The company that should be, it gets huge profits from doing this, they should be paying for better protection of the communities which host these facilities. The company should use continuous sampling of dioxins, the 4-week samples that I've talked about. The company should pay for monitoring of dioxins in chickens' eggs in local community, as I showed you in the Netherlands. The company should pay for the monitoring of nanoparticle levels in the local community before and after the cement kiln goes into operation. The company should provide the community funding to hire independent experts to review all promotional materials, etc., for the community. Government should prohibit the recycling of fly ash into the kiln and thence into the clinker and thence into the cement. The cement should be labeled that it was made using waste as a fuel in its production. If they're proud of this, then put it on the label. But citizens need to know when they're handling a toxic product. And lastly, the label should also contain an elemental analysis for the toxic metals present, the lead, the cadmium, the thallium, etc. And that's the end of my talk, and I thank you all for listening very much.
Gracias.